will decentralized identity be the entry point for full stack smart cities? And Rob, we saw the things that came out around BIA and their smart city, how they're going to be integrating the solution that the Hashgraph group has around decentralized identity. This is, of course, right up your alley, considering smart cities could potentially use things like micropayments for smart homes, for autonomous vehicles, and the list goes on. But what are your thoughts around this kind of being a good foot in the door as far as decentralized identity for these smart cities?
Yeah, it's a big question to start on. From digital identity to smart cities and that convergence. The BR announcement a couple of weeks ago is kind of the culmination of a lot of work. We've been hearing about BR from THA and THG on Newscom for quite some time now. So it's great to get to the point where there's a public announcement, and there are many use cases they're looking at around waste management and smart cities and all the things that the BR group do. But identity is always the kind of the cornerstone of a lot of these use cases, and not just the ones that BR are looking at. Identity and decentralized identity and ways of solving for that without kind of centralizing honeypots of personal data, which is the alternative, we see all the time. In fact, identity is one of the 5 core themes that I'm looking at from a HEAP perspective. Along with stablecoins and digital money, along with real-world asset tokenization, along with sustainability and AI and AI provenance. The 5th one that keeps on coming up, and in my conversations with council members and enterprise more widely, digital identity needs to be solved for. Now, identity and self-sovereign identity and decentralized identities solutions have been around since for 10 years or more in terms of how blockchains and DLTs can solve for these issues. We still don't have standards, single standard to get behind, and so the market is quite fragmented. W3C or Hyperledger Indy and Noncreds, they're kind of still wrangling the actual identity standards, and of course, without that, it becomes difficult to align. You end up with pockets of development following different standards. So that we're still kind of working through that. Now, I built an identity platform for EFTPOS back in the day, Connect ID, which is still going strong. We built that as a federated model. We built that, which means that it's not decentralized. It requires a group of issuers and the agreement within a framework, or within a scheme for the participants to interoperate. So some of your data might be held by banks or telcos or government, and the framework allows for me as as an individual or holder of an identity to kind of share that or claim, attest to some facts about me. Decentralization takes that away. Full decentralization means that in the same way as I hold my crypto or my tokens, I also hold my credentials, right? And so the same things apply in terms of management of keys and security, etc. So we're somewhere in between, and we don't really want to go full decentralization yet. I say we, the wider space. But there are many, many ways of leveraging the technology in order to improve the DLT-based solutions. And when we're looking at smart cities, these are massive, complex kind of data organisms. They behave like organisms, and the human interactions with all the systems that allow for them to operate are super complex. But imagine a smart city where a citizen kind of interacted with all these systems every day. They don't want a centralized honeypot of identity data that's feels a bit too surveillance state for most citizens to kind of sign up to. And one could see the benefits of having this kind of foundational layer or trust fabric, which supports the holders, the individuals, being able to share under their own consent certain attributes about themselves. So the identity or the credentials, if you like. I am over 18, or I do have a license to drive that vehicle, or I am a member of this club. Those sorts of things, without actually showing all of your tombstone data, or all of your, your address and your date of birth and everything, which, you shouldn't have to. So that foundational layer, one can imagine a smart city having, which supports the privacy and the confidentiality of one's, personal information, which is private, but also allows for all parties, all the businesses, all the, the organizations and entities within that data organism, that smart city, to receive and act upon them under, my or one's consent-driven control. So that's good. We also need kind of data levels of control. So the foundational layer is the trust layer. So that's the DLT. And then you've got the data control. So DIDs, so decentralized identifiers, allow for those things to be, immutably or in a privacy protecting way, logged to the underlying foundational layer. We also need interoperability. So interoperability between these systems is really key. So having a trust layer supports interoperability between these elements, these entities within this data organism, and an economic layer. Clearly, we know and we talk about a lot. And I wrote a paper a few years ago on micropayments and smart cities and how Hedera supports that. That economic layer is required within a city. One can imagine a city actually issuing its own coins, its own coinage, which obviously used to happen, back in the day, before we had banks that was centralized, the storage of money and the issuing of money. We had local currencies. And so a local currency for a city or a city state, is a fairly small step then. And this same technology supports tokenization, let's say stable coins or tokenized deposits, or whatever that city wants to issue that supports the the movement of value between all of the entities within this data organism. And obviously, as we know, the same tech supports the holding of one's tokenized credentials with the holding of one's tokenized value. And micropayments become a real thing then. It becomes, you can interact in very small units of value in a way which is commercially viable for all of the participants within that organism. And then I guess the final thing for a smart city, using an identity platform such as this, is in terms of participatory governance. So, voting or the ability to interact with the governance of that organization as a citizen or a member of that organization. One can token gate or prove one's citizenship and therefore one's right to participate in votes of kind of import or non-important ones as well.
Sure.
So, all of those layers in that stack allow for, a smart city to perform in a lot more efficient way and utilizing the underlying distributed ledger, which, ideally would be Hedera, of course.
Of course. Well, it only makes sense to me when I talk to people about or explain distributed ledger technology. It's a ledger first, right? And I always think about it just like an Excel sheet, right? You have the who on all of the rows, and that can be an autonomous agent, that can be an individual, that could be smart things, right? What they're doing with CLSQ. It's the who, and then all of the columns are the what. That could be HBAR, that could be karate, that could be stable coins or stocks or bonds or whatever, and it's just telling you who has what. And it's just the next step of actually allowing all of those who's to have individual identity. They're tied to an individual. So again, it makes perfect sense to me. Rob, is there anything else you want to touch on identity or smart cities before we move on to the next one?
Well, you made a good point. I was talking a lot about citizens, but the identity of things, in a smart city is super important as well. So, IoT devices, the sensors, the autonomous vehicles, the bots, the agents, the robots, everything would need identity. It would presumably have some kind of delegated authority from that device's human. And so, like any other organism, a data organism such as a smart city will evolve. You can't design rigidly from the outset what it's going to look like. But what you can do is provide the foundational layers and the standards and allow for it to evolve in a way that, may be constrained or may not be constrained. But, those technological advances would also would participate in that organism as well. It's a really exciting time because we now have all of these technologies available to us and they're evolving rapidly. So I don't think there's any chance of getting ahead of it, but we can design for it. We can design for security. We can design for privacy. We can design, for human first behavior within this data organism, and then allow it to evolve in a way which supports that particular community. Very, very exciting.